And here we are with part 2 of our exciting series on the literature review in the Capstone Research Project. We previously covered some basic concepts of synthesis and summary and ways to approach conceptualizing your literature review. Now let's move on to more of the nitty-gritty of actually constructing your literature review, which begins with finding scholarly articles to use. So it's just as easy as 1, 2, 3, right? Well, maybe it's a little bit more than 1, 2, 3. First thing we need to do is identify search terms. Now, this may be simple for some projects. Maybe we're looking at an issue related to college student retention. And so we would just type in college student retention in our favorite library search database and click the search button. And we would get a lot of results. But sometimes we need to think more carefully about what we're searching for and how to go about searching it. So one thing I'm going to share with you, rather than make this a lengthy video, is Catherine Farmer, who is the librarian assigned to the College of Education and Human Services, has recorded a great video on utilizing the library resources online, including conducting searches specific to education. So I'm going to be posting that in the Literature Review Resources page on Canvas, which is how you accessed these videos. So once we've gone through our search terms, we need to sort through and figure out what articles are really interesting to us. And again, Ms. Farmer provides some great tips in her video on how to go about making sense of what comes up as you conduct your literature searches. Something else I'm posting or is posted on Canvas is a search tool to help you keep track of your searches. You may have utilized this in ADM 630, so hopefully it's familiar to you. But what you'll see is it's basically just a table that you can use as a tool to help you keep track of the searches that you've conducted. Something else that's on Canvas is a more detailed table that's for you to use if you want to use it to keep track of the actual articles that you pull. Now this can be handy because you need to actually sort through the articles that you pull and divide them into different ways, and into different piles and buckets, as you'll see in a couple slides. So you've gone through a process of searching for articles and sorting those articles. Then comes the time-consuming part. You need to actually read what you find. And I'm not just talking about flipping through the pages and trying to scan to see if there's some keywords that jump off the page to you. You need to actually read them. And don't just read the literature review portion or the summary at the beginning. You don't need to read the implications and conclusions. You need to read the entire article. There are going to be things that you could find in an article that are going to be very important to you to set up your study. And then something I suggest is actually summarizing the articles. Now this is for your use and not necessarily for insertion into your manuscript as you write your literature review. But it can be very handy to go through the process of basically writing an article abstract. And once again, there's a tool that you might find useful on Canvas to help you approach summarizing these articles. And then the sixth step or sixth item to really think about is critiquing articles. Just because something has been published doesn't mean it's great, unless it's been written by myself or Dr. Littlepage. You need to really have a critical eye as a scholar as you read things. Again, just because someone has published it doesn't mean it's great. And just because it's on your topic or related to your topic doesn't mean that you have to include it in your literature review. You may find something that looks like it's a great fit, but you go through and you read it and say, wow, this is not really what I need. The methodology is flawed. There are some issues with what the author has assumed. There are conclusions that are really not supported by the data presented in the manuscript, things like that. Those things are supposed to be caught through the peer review process, but they aren't always caught. And because it's peers reviewing it, they're fellow human beings, and so we all miss things. We all let things slip through sometimes. So we just have to be very critical of what we read. So another perspective on identifying search terms. Start with your own topic. If you're not finding a lot from there, or you're finding a whole lot and need ways to narrow it, consider variations. What are synonyms for your topic? Conduct searches with synonyms. You may even try searching for antonyms. There could be an adverse perspective of your topic that you hadn't thought of before. You never know what could come up. And then use limiters. In Ms. Farmer's video, she talks about or demonstrates how to limit the years on the database search. You want scholarly articles that have been published within the last 10 years. There is a definite shelf life to scholarship. Now, there's an exception to this rule. There are what are referred to as seminal pieces. These are things that are maybe a little bit dated, but continue to be cited again and again by pretty much anybody who writes on the topic. So, for example, let's say that you are interested in a topic related to college student retention. You'll definitely find yourself citing Vincent Tinto's work from 1975, from 1987, from 1993, from 2000. And that's okay. You should cite those things. But you also need to make sure that you're citing the most current literature. And in the case of retention literature, Vincent Tinto is not the only person who writes about retention. This was actually something I called students out for quite regularly at my last institution. They would think that just because they cited the most heavily cited author that they were done with a literature review, and they were far from done. So I previously mentioned sorting things into piles and kind of corrected myself and said you need to think through things in buckets. I have a colleague named Michael Harris who is a faculty member at Southern Methodist University in their higher ed program. And he always likes to use the analogy of dividing literature that we find for our theses or dissertations into buckets. And he first used this because this was back in the day when we would print everything out that we found and sit there with our highlighters and comb through our articles. Now, things are much more readily available electronically through PDF and clean PDFs at that, and we can mark them up. Maybe we use an annotation program such as iAnnotate on our iPads or something like that. But Michael suggests having a pretty limited number of buckets, maybe 3 or 4. And not having just a sea of buckets where we try to divide things into this almost infinite pattern where every article we find is its own unique thing. And we need to be able to divide things into meaningful ways because this is going to come in pretty handy for writing our literature review. And I'll show how, or demonstrate how in just a moment. So, as we think about summarizing our articles, again, we need to think about writing our own abstract, identifying the key points, and making the connection to our own topic. And that's probably the most important part. If we think about writing a summary of articles that we find, we need to be making notes for ourselves about how that article relates to our topic. And then the next step beyond that is how does each article connect to others in that individual bucket that we've sorted the article into. So I suggest writing an outline for each bucket. I actually like to treat each bucket almost as its own term paper. And we've all written those papers for classes in grad school where the entire paper is basically just a literature review. So really, y'all have written a literature review before. So I hope we can demystify the idea of a literature review as being this big scary thing because we've all done it already in the papers that you've written for courses in the PSE program. So we need to have already written some article summaries before we can go into outlining. And taking this approach for outlining the bucket and writing about each bucket as its own term paper can help us do a couple things. It can help us determine if the bucket is too broad, or then we need to maybe divide a single bucket into 2 smaller buckets. And then this can also help us determine if some of the literature that we've pulled really isn't usable. And that's part of the hard part. We've spent time and invested energy into reading and summarizing articles, but at the end of the day, some of those articles really are not going to be useful to us. And so taking this approach and these steps can help us cull through those things in what is hopefully part of the early stage of writing the lit review. So what if? What if there's not much current literature on my topic, or there's tons of current literature on my topic? Well, both of these things happen, and we need to have a way to make sense of either of those occurring. Well, if there's not much lit, well, we need to get off the main tracks. We need to think about some tangentially related areas of literature that we could borrow from to try to explore our topic. Now, if that seems like a somewhat nebulous concept, please come talk to Dr. Littlepage or myself about making sense of that. It takes practice sometimes to think about the related areas of literature that we can draw from when we don't find much directly on our topic. But then sometimes we have to be careful also with those tangential topics because they can become very distracting. And it's easy to go off course with those topics. We find ourselves chasing a rabbit down the hole, and next thing we know, we've written 30 pages on something that has nothing to do with our topic. So that's it for part 2. Next up will be part 3 of the literature review.